Chapter 16. Long-run growth. Long-run growth. In this chapter, we will describe a brief history of economic growth, the sources of growth, and discuss the environmental issues associated with growth. Output growth, the growth rate of the output of the entire economy. Per capita output growth, the growth rate of output per person in the economy. Labor productivity growth, the growth rate of output per worker. The growth process, from agriculture to industry. Beginning in England around 1750, technical change and capital accumulation increased productivity significantly in agriculture and textiles. New inventions and new machinery meant that more could be produced with fewer resources. Growth meant new products, more output, and wider choice. A rural agrarian society was quickly transformed into an urban industrial society. Growth comes from a bigger workforce and more productive workers. The growth process, from agriculture to industry, continued. Catch up. The theory stating that the growth rates of less developed countries will exceed the growth rates of developed countries, allowing the less developed countries to catch up. The idea that gaps in national incomes tend to close over time is called convergence theory. An economic historian coined the term advantages of backwardness to describe the phenomenon of less developed countries leaping ahead by borrowing technology from more developed countries. Figure 16.1 shows economic growth shifts society's production possibility frontier up and to the right. The production possibility frontier shows all the combinations of output that can be produced if all society's scarce resources are fully and efficiently employed. Economic growth expands society's production possibilities, shifting the PPF up and to the right. Table 16.1 shows growth of real GDP, from 1996 to 2013. Sources of economic growth. Aggregate production function, a mathematical relationship stating that total GDP, output, depends on the total amount of labor used and the total amount of capital used. Consider the simple hypothetical production function. Both capital and labor are needed for production, and increases in either result in more output. Economics in practice. Government strategy for growth. The distance from the technological frontier might influence growth strategies pursued by that country. The government knows what the right technology is and can help its firms find the world frontier through innovation. For this reason, policies to support entrepreneurship and improve the workings of venture capital will likely work better. Increase in labor supply. In the absence of increases in the capital stock, as labor increases, less and less output will be added by each new worker. This effect is called diminishing returns. With diminishing returns, as labor supply grows, output increases but at a declining rate, and increases in the labor supply reduce labor productivity, or output per worker. Table 16.2 shows economic growth from an increase in labor. More output but diminishing returns and lower labor productivity. Table 16.3 shows employment, labor force, and population growth, from 1960 to 2014. Increase in physical capital. There are diminishing returns to capital when more and more capital is added to a fixed supply of labor. New capital can come from the saving of a country's residents and/or from the investments of foreigners. Foreign direct investment, FDI, investment in enterprises made in a country by residents outside that country. Countries with poor institutions, corruption, and inadequate protection for lenders and investors struggle to attract capital. The World Bank calls them fragile countries. Table 16.4 shows economic growth from an increase in capital. More output, diminishing returns to added capital, higher labor productivity. Increase in the quality of the labor supply, human capital. The level of educational attainment in the United States has risen significantly since 1940. As the quality of labor increases through more education, labor productivity increases. Policymakers in many developed economies are concerned about their ability to continue to generate growth through human capital improvements. Table 16.6 shows years of school completed by people older than 25 years, from 1940 to 2014. Increase in the quality of capital, embodied technical change. Embodied technical change that results in an improvement in the quality of capital. An increase in the quality of capital increases labor productivity. The quality of capital has increased because of embodied technical change. Disembodied technical change. Disembodied technical change that results in a change in the production process. Since disembodied technical changes are mostly positive, labor productivity has increased when people have figured out how to run production processes and how to manage firms more efficiently. More on technical change, 1 of 2. Invention and advance in knowledge. Innovation, the use of new knowledge to produce a new product or to produce an existing product more efficiently. A commonly used measure of inputs into research is the fraction of GDP spent. More on technical change, 2 of 2. The United States will lose some of its edge in technology unless more funding is provided, but the National Academies of Science argued. Although many people assume that the United States will always be a world leader in science and technology, this may not continue to be the case inasmuch as great minds and ideas exist throughout the world. We fear the abruptness with which a lead in science and technology can be lost and the difficulty of recovering a lead once lost, if indeed it can be recovered at all. U.S. labor productivity, from 1952 to 2014. Figure 16.2 shows output per worker hour, productivity. There was a slowdown in productivity growth in the 1970s. Some of the explanations for this slowdown included a low rate of saving, environmental and government regulation, and little spending on R&D. Many of these factors turned around in the 1980s and 1990s, and productivity rose to 2.0% in the 1990s through 2014. Growth and the environment and issues of sustainability, 1 of 3. Table 16.7 shows environmental scores in the World Bank Country Policy and Institutional Assessment 2005 scores, min equals 1, max equals 6. The scores in this table include factors such as education, mortality, and income growth. A set of environmental criteria including clean air, clean water, and conservation management is also taken into account. Growth and the environment and issues of sustainability, 2 of 3. Much of Southeast Asia has fueled its growth through export-led manufacturing. For countries that have based their growth on resource extraction, there is another set of issues, because extraction can be accomplished without a well-educated labor force. Public investment in infrastructure is especially important. The question of whether the natural resource base imposes strong natural limits on growth has been debated since the time of Malthus. Figure 16.3 shows the relationship between per capita GDP and urban air pollution. Growth and the environment and issues of sustainability, 3 of 3. In 1972, the Club of Rome released a study titled The Limits to Growth, which suggested that the entire world economy would reach its limits sometime after the year 2000. Collapse occurs because of non-renewable resource depletion. The industrial capital stock grows to a level that requires an enormous input of resources. In the very process of that growth, it depletes a large fraction of the resource reserves available. As resource prices rise and mines are depleted, more and more capital must be used for obtaining resources, leaving less to be invested for future growth. Finally, investment cannot keep up with depreciation and the industrial base collapses, taking with it the service and agricultural systems, which have become dependent on industrial inputs, such as fertilizers, pesticides, hospital laboratories, computers, and especially energy for mechanization. Population finally decreases when the death rate is driven upward by the lack of food and health services.